Well, the nomination is in, and this week starts the hearing for the historic nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson for the U.S. Supreme Court. What does it all mean for us? What does it mean for African Americans? And how will it impact the balance of the court? It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be back in just a moment to discuss this historic hearing. Welcome back. It's Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We're so happy that you're joining us again, live as we broadcast on the campus of the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nations, from the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA, here in beautiful Hampton Roads. It is a phenomenal day. I don't know if you've been outside, but the weather is absolutely great. It's a little pollen out there, so if you got allergies like I do, and everybody that I know just about, make sure you take care of yourself. But enjoy this weather because, again, the springtime is here. Always in the studio, we have with us our producer, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, which can be heard every Monday through Friday here on WNSB, Hot 91, the Soul of VA, from 2 to 6 p.m. And we'd also like to congratulate our Spartan men's and women basketball team. Yes, it's March Madness. And last week, a week before last, we won the MEAC. Of course, the women won the regular season, tied for the regular season MEAC title, and they lost in the championship game to Howard University. And both of them played phenomenal games in the first round of the women for the NIT against Drexel University. They ended up coming up a little short. A great game, though. And also the men that played the defending national champions, Baylor University, which actually lost yesterday, okay, and to North Carolina, I believe it was. So the North Carolina got it on their mind this year. So we'll see what happens in that. But hats off to the men, 2 out of 3 years to the NCAA tournament. Coach Jones is doing a phenomenal job with those young men, not just on the court, but also off the court, instilling great discipline, character, and performing at an extremely high level. So we congratulate the Spartan basketball men and women's team for a phenomenal season, and we're looking for another great season coming up. So we know the work doesn't stop there. So this week, we have an historic process that we're going to go through in our nation's history. And it is the confirmation hearing for the U.S. Supreme Court nominee. And for those of you that, before last 4 years, a lot of us really hadn't gone through this or really knew a lot about it, and you got the same usual suspects, right? But last 4 years, former President Trump nominated and really packed the court through Senator McConnell, who I call Judge McConnell, Justice McConnell, and the rules that he manipulated in order to get the court packed for the conservative side. But then this year, we have President Joe Biden, who not just put up his first nomination, but nominated the first African-American woman to the U.S. Supreme Court in 230-year history of the court here in the United States. Phenomenal. We've been talking about it, but we're going to talk about it from a different aspect because today we have 2 African-American sisters who are legal scholars who are going to join us here today to talk about this particular process. We have with us Jelani Jefferson-Exum, who is the dean of the School of Law, and Philip J. McElroy, professor of law at the University of Detroit Mercy, and also her sister, Jalila Jefferson-Bullock, who is in Pittsburgh and also a law professor there at Duquesne University School of Law, where she teaches constitutional law. Sisters, dean, legal scholars, professors, welcome to Stay the Water.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Well, this is really a treat for us here on this show in Hampton Roads, and I'm going to talk about our connection just a moment. But also, it's a treat because we have two sisters who are both lawyers, who are both legal scholars, who are both on the show at the same time, and like each other enough to actually be on the show at the same time to talk about this historic moment. This is definitely a huge treat. But our connection here is that it's always good to have fellow Louisianians on the show here, State of the Water.
No, we are happy to be here. We are, in fact, two sisters, but we'd be remiss if we didn't also say that we have a third sister who's a law professor also, Jalila Jefferson-Jones, and she's a professor at Wayne State Law School. She just teaches in a different area, so we don't get to work with her as often when we're doing things about policing and sentencing. But we are a team of three law professors, and we also have two other younger sisters. So we're always excited when we get to be together and work together.
Absolutely.
So it's a treat.
We're always extremely excited when we get to connect with other folks from Louisiana, too. So thank you so much for this Louisiana moment that we get to all share. We love that, and we don't take it for granted.
Absolutely. So, Dean Jelani, and if you could, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in the capacity there at University of Detroit Mercy.
Sure. I am the Dean of the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. I just took that post in July. I joined the faculty there in 2019 and really just enjoyed the place. Saw students from the Detroit area and local region who are just tenacious and go-getters and really want to be lawyers who are impactful. Detroit Mercy Law is a school of social justice, and we really focus on ethics and service to the community, which were values that I hold deeply. So it's really been a privilege to lead that school in its next phase of its vision. My research area, which I continue to do my research even as dean, is in criminal sentencing and punishment, and also policing. And so I've been I've watched Judge Jackson. I know we'll talk about her soon. I've watched her career in sentencing and punishment and really admired the thoughtfulness that she brings to her work. And so I'm just so excited to be a part of this discussion and to be able to put in context what we're hearing on the news, and talk about those issues that I know are so near and dear to our communities when we think about just fairness and justice.
Absolutely. And, that's unique for focus of a law school because especially in the time period that we're in, a lot that we saw in what we call BLM. As a matter of fact, I was just in D.C. this weekend and going down Black Lives Matter corridor, that area where it's painted in the street right in front of the, going down 16th, right in front of the White House. It reminds you and it brings back memories of not just what we've gone through, but where we have to go. So it's amazing that there is a law school that's helping to focus and prepare future legal scholars and practitioners in that particular area.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very proud of ourselves and our mission and the fact that 80% of our students are first-generation law students. Wow. So we're also a school of access and legacy building, and we're very, very proud of that.
Awesome. So, Jalila, as a law professor there at Duquesne University, and yes, I got it right on the first time, Duquesne. To tell us a little bit about yourself and the focus that you're focused on there.
Sure. So I've been at Duquesne since the fall of 2017. My career began, though, at a different institution in Arizona. At Duquesne, I teach constitutional law. I also teach criminal procedure, and I teach a course on race and American law. At other institutions, in some downtime, I also teach critical race theory courses. I am a prison abolitionist, and it took me a moment to get to that place. But I'm a person who believes that prison should be reserved, at least prison as we exercise, prison now. Prison should be reserved for the most heinous of crimes, and I believe very strongly in kind of revitalizing the concept of rehabilitation. And so that's really what my work centers around. I write a lot in the area of compassionate release and the idea of looking back in order to reduce the prison population and considering those areas where perhaps a person has changed or perhaps circumstances have changed such that they no longer need to be imprisoned. It no longer fulfills any of our punishment theories. So that's the bulk of the work that I do in my research. In my constitutional law classes, although, of course, we cover everything at Duquesne, it's a class where we teach common law 1 and 2 semesters. It's a very intense deep dive. But I like to focus a lot, especially in my constitutional law 2 case classes, on issues of race and equal protection, because I believe that as the only tenured black woman right now, black person, really only tenured person of color in the School of Law, I believe very strongly that students need to hear from my voice, just like they're going to need to hear from Judge Jackson's voice when she finally joins the Supreme Court.
Wow. You know, you just really made a major point when you say you're the only African-American person of color that is tenured at that law school. And for our audience that's listening, you know, that's, of course, tenure is a major feat for any person who is a professor within the academy. But specifically for a law school, what does it mean to be tenured there and to be the only black person that's tenured and the only black female tenured?
Well, for me, it means that I have a major responsibility, because we know tenure means that I'd have to do something really outrageous for them to fire me. And even then, it would take some doing for them to get me out of there. So for me, it means I have to act with a certain measure of courage. And I have to be very, very sure that I take the time to not only represent myself and look out for my own interests, but those of other faculty of color, other women, prospective candidates, people who may come to join our faculty, and that I really wrap my arms around our black students, who are few and far between in numbers as well. So for me, it means acting with that type of, courage every day and being intentional about helping other people, and then being really intentional about recruiting other faculty of color. Because, in many of these spaces, if we don't do the recruiting ourselves, it simply does not happen.
That's right.
So for me, that's kind of what all of that means.
Well, okay. So what I want to do, I want to get into what we're going to experience this week. You mentioned your voice being heard just as why it's so important for, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, the new U.S. Supreme Court Justice, who's going to be confirmed if all things work out, her voice needs to be heard. So, Dean, tell us, what does it mean for you to see this black woman, that comes from the South, rise to this level in the first time in 230 years of our history in this country?
It's just so very exciting. You said it, 200 years. I mean, we've waited a collective 233 years to see a black woman on the Supreme Court. We've seen 115 justices and never a black woman. And when you just think about all of the contributions that we've made as black women to this country, to the building of this country, the importance of our voices, the perspective that we bring, it really is just unbelievable that we've gone so long without having that voice on the court, and just so exciting. I'm so proud of Judge Jackson, but really proud of us as a collective, because there are so many black women throughout history and in current day who are so qualified and could have been on the Supreme Court, and to finally have the moment when that's being recognized, and to see our sister elevated in this way is just truly exciting and a really, really proud moment.
Well, Professor, what does it mean for you to see this black woman go before the Senate to be confirmed?
It's an awe-inspiring, just phenomenal moment for me and for other black women around the country, but it also should be for the entire country. As a black woman, as excellent as we are, and we know that we are excellent as a body, as a group, we still don't see ourselves in those spaces, the highest spaces of excellence, places where, many of us belong. And so it's so wonderful now to see this incredible, this brilliant, amazing jurist finally be elevated to such an honored place in our country's governance. And I just could not be prouder to see a face that looks like mine, and to know that in many ways she's experienced lots of what I've experienced in terms of racism, in terms of being gendered, in terms of being made to feel as if she doesn't belong in certain spaces. And yes, she's overcome all of that and is getting ready to be seated to a position on the highest court of our country. I mean, my goodness, it is really an incredible incredible moment. And like my sister said, I could not be prouder.
Both of you hit on 2 points that I've got to have you address. It's the word qualified and also seeing yourself in the space. Why is it that every time we hear of an African-American woman, in this instance, be nominated for a position or be promoted to a position, the word, are they qualified, always comes up, right? You never hear that with a white male. You never hear that with a white female. But it's always a black person. Why is that?
Well, that's funny. Go ahead, Jelani.
No, you go ahead, Jalila. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's funny. Underlying all of this is, we've got to always consider the historic, the really systemic nature of racism in our country, and the fact that any time those statements are made, are there any qualified people? Will this person be just as qualified as a white man? So on and so forth. Underlying all of that is that myth of inferiority that black people have had to reckon with, since we've been in this country, that we could never, that somehow inherently we're less important, we're inferior, and that we could never be as qualified as a white person, no matter how hard we try. That's something that black women have had to fight against forever. And so that notion of being qualified then becomes part of our narrative. Are we good enough? Are we special enough? Are we strong enough? Do we bring enough to the table? And the answer, especially in the case of Judge Jackson, is of course. I mean, she exceeds every traditional marker of excellence that we said is important in a Supreme Court nominee. Every single one, she meets it or exceeds it, and even brings perspectives that others don't currently have. But this idea of are we qualified, it's this underlying thing that we could never be qualified, and that's something we've had to always fight against in this country, and I'm not so sure that it's going away anytime soon, even when you have someone as overly qualified and as exceptional as Judge Jackson is.
Dean?
Well, she's just said it all. That's the story. The only thing I'll add is that, you also asked about this idea of representation and seeing someone who looks like us. That's connected, right? Because we have had to fight against this narrative of not being qualified, of being kept out of positions. Jalila just mentioned that she's the first black tenured professor, woman at her school. I'm the first dean who's a person of color at all at my school. Second woman, first person of color. So, of course, first black person to be dean at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. And it's just this idea that there are these coveted spaces in which we have to really prove through overqualification that we belong. And so when you make it to those spaces, it is just so important to recognize how you represent the hopes and dreams of so many others who either were kept out of those spaces or who are looking to see that as a road for themselves. And so, having Judge Jackson eventually become Justice Jackson is not only because she is supremely qualified, but also the excitement is that she's showing that there's absolutely no reason that the highest court on the land should be off limits to black women or to anybody, in fact.
Absolutely. When you talk about being in the place, representation in the place, and being qualified, when you look at her career, now she's been confirmed to as a federal judge and also the appellate court, D.C. appellate court already. So it's not like she's new to the process. It's just the U.S. Supreme Court that we're looking at, which is the most high profile and the such. But before that, she was basically representing, people that couldn't represent themselves, right? Public defender. And how important do you think it is, Dean, that her experience, both as a black woman from the South, as a woman who had to overcome being told that she's reaching too high, all right, by her school counselor, saying that she couldn't go to Harvard College, but she did. And then also working in the public sector, representing those that couldn't represent themselves. How important do you believe that is, all of her experience, as she rises to the highest court?
And I think it's extremely important, and important in lots of different ways. It shows that she's a real person with real experiences, and she understands how the law affects everyday people all the time. She understands the barriers that are out there, obstacles, systemic obstacles. I mean, she faced them herself, even as she was excelling in school and really setting herself up as a stellar student with a great career ahead. She was even discouraged to continue to press on. And that's so many. I mean, going back to the fact of her identity as a black woman, so many of us as black women have faced that. I know I did as well. I remember my pre-law advisor in college telling me to, not to apply to Harvard Law School because that was going to be a little bit too much of a stretch. And I graduated magna cum laude from undergrad. I mean, this is a common story, right? And it's ridiculous. But her experiences show that she understands that. She understands barriers. As a public defender, there's this narrative out there that means she's soft on crime because she, has stood up for people accused of crimes. But when you really look at it, this is one of the highest forms of really honoring the Constitution, which gives us this right of public defense, which says that everyone has the right to have someone stand up for them when they are accused of a crime that were presumed innocent. She understands all of that, and she also understands both the sort of promise of our Constitution and our government, and also its pitfalls and its weaknesses. She's seen it at its worst, and she's worked for it to be its best. And I think these are all qualities that are so admirable about Judge Jackson that we would all want to have in a Supreme Court justice. And I just think bringing all of that to the table means that she's going to be a justice who's thoughtful, who thinks about how the law affects actual people, the consequences of cases. She's not going to be someone sort of sitting on a pedestal, disconnected from everyday life. And I think that is hugely important and will really benefit us all, our entire country, in the long run.
Absolutely. Professor, what is it? How important do you think those aspects are of her experience as she rises to the highest court in the land?
Oh, critically important. I think that people often forget that Supreme Court opinions don't just kind of exist in a vacuum outside of everyday reality. The Supreme Court issues opinions that affect everyday people. They really do affect you and I. They affect all of us. And so it's very important that you have somebody on the court who can bring a perspective outside of the traditional perspective, one that can bring a diversity of perspectives on the bench so that at the end of the day, the court looks like us, and perhaps we can see ourselves in some of the opinions. The opinions consider not just the elite few, which has been the case on the court for a very long time, but all of us. And so it's critically important that someone is on the bench who has that diversity of perspective, especially from the federal public defender point of view. It is incredibly important. So I think that she is in a space where she is so well qualified because of the differences that she brings in terms of having done that federal public defender work, in terms of being a black woman. I mean, the addition she brings will bring such a wealth of experience to the court and will really help all of us as these decisions are handed down. So I think all of that is incredibly important. And I'll make one more point too.
Absolutely.
In my classes, I sometimes look at the history of their justices and kind of what their experiences were. And I usually start with justices who I've met, which is, I know, whatever, but that's what I do. And so I was looking at some stuff about the history between Justice O'Connor, who I got to spend some time with when I was working in Arizona, and Justice Marshall, who I met very briefly, randomly in the halls of Congress one day. And it was life-changing for me, even though it was just a brief encounter. Those two had a relationship that many of us are not really aware of. Justice O'Connor talks about what an honor it was to serve with a real-life hero. And she also talks about how, having grown up in the Southwest, there were issues about discrimination and racism and oppression that she just did not see on a daily basis, and she did not understand. And she says that one of the greatest learning moments of her life was when she got a chance to serve with Justice Marshall and hear from him his firsthand experiences around racism and discrimination, and how much of that informed her thinking and helped her to be the type of justice who maybe thought outside of herself and was able to see things from the point of view of other people. And I think that's the type of focus, given her blackness, given her womanhood, given her varied practice experience. I think that's the type of perspective that Justice Jackson is going to bring to the court, where even if she is in the dissent a lot of times with some of the issues that matter to us the most, still she'll be pressing on that basic humanity that black women bring to the table. I think that's going to help everybody.
It's very interesting you bring that up, because I want to talk about that aspect of relationships, right? Because what we see in the public eye is usually totally different from what happens behind closed doors. And from my experience of working both on the local, state level and experiencing the federal level of policymaking, we see things that happen, the press conferences that take place, but a lot of these people are friends. A lot of these people go to dinner together, they talk together. Some are more collegial than others, right? Okay. But at the same time, you have that personal relationship. I want to bring up two examples. And Dean, I want to get your take on this before we go to our first break. And we're going to come back in the second half hour and talk about this process of what we're going to see this week and kind of dispel some of these misconceptions that are going to come out. But, Justice Scalia, who's passed away, and also he was very good friends with Justice Ginsburg, and their ideology was so far apart. You would think, how could these two be friends? But they had this thing where they would wish each other, do things for them on their birthday. I think Scalia used to sing "Happy Birthday" to Justice Ginsburg and so forth. And you kind of also see what happened when there was a false report of the Supreme Court with Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kavanaugh. And they're like, you know what? They both put out a rare statement to say, no, that is not the case. We're actually very good friends. That didn't take place. How valuable are those relationships, Dean, behind closed doors? Because I know you see it in academia. You got professors that battle, and being dean, you got to sometimes play mediator and negotiator. But how important are those personal relationships as relates to the decision making of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, relationships are everything. We politicize a lot on the outside in the media spaces, certainly, and sort of pit people against each other as though justices are always coming to a case with a certain agenda and only voting one way all the time. And that's just not true. And I think, you mentioned Judge Jackson being a district court judge and also an appellate court judge. She was also vice chair of the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And I think that's a great example of where she really showed that she is a relationship builder and that she can sort of move people in a direction of consensus and agreement just through her relationship. So as the vice chair of the U.S. Sentencing Commission, she was working with a bipartisan group. She had commissioners who were appointed by Democratic, who were Democrats and those who were Republicans working together. And all reports of those who worked with her during that time was that she was able to speak across ideological lines, find common ground, that she was a consensus builder, and that she would lead the commission to have unanimous agreements on certain sentencing policies. And so that's the sort of thing that we can expect from Judge Jackson. That's the sort of approach where, the justices are already building their own friendships, but I believe that she'll be so highly respected in the way that she finds that common ground. And so there's friendship, but there's also friendship that transcends into understanding and saying, okay, when we're actually talking about these legal issues, can you see where I'm coming from? Do you hear the experience that I'm bringing to the table? And let's find places of commonality so that we can move justice forward. And I'm excited to see what she's going to do as a justice because of the work that she's done in the past in this sort of relationship building and consensus building.
In the last 30 seconds of this first half hour discussion, Professor, do you think that we are lacking commonality and coming together of consensus building now on the court?
Well, I think that we have some, perhaps this new justice will help to bring the court together, perhaps, I think that there are some areas where it looks as though justices can't really agree, perhaps in areas where we might think that there ought to be agreement. At the same time, though, I wouldn't call it a problem, but I would say that it would be nice to see someone who is a well-known, who has a real track record of being a consensus builder come in and perhaps I wouldn't say repair relationships, but perhaps find places of common understanding, where that may perhaps be a little bit more persuasive to some justices who might otherwise rule a different way.
Well, look, we're going to delve into it when we get back. We're going to take our very first break. This is State of the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be back in just a moment.
Join Keep Norfolk Beautiful for their regional kickoff of the Great American Cleanup at Lafayette Park, Friday, March 25th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. All supplies will be provided. In addition to a litter cleanup, they will have trash can painting and beautification activities in the park. Don't miss this event. Register online, www.norfolk.gov/KNB, or for more information, email knb@norfolk.gov.
Hi, it's Dr. Eric Claville, award-winning host of State of the Water, where we bring policymakers, movers, and shakers to you to discuss real issues and current events impacting African Americans. Tune in every Sunday at 1 o'clock here on WNSB Hot 91. State of the Water is engaging, educational, informative, and impactful, an initiative of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University.
If you are a charity, foundation, or 501c3 organization and you have an initiative that you would like to partner with WNSB, well, send us an email with the flyer to wnsbradio@nsu.edu. Announcements are based on availability.
Welcome back at State of the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We want to thank you for joining us here live as we broadcast on the campus of the Norfolk State University here in the great city of Norfolk, Virginia, Hampton Roads area, the 757 on the new sound of Hot 91, the soul of VA. We have with us in the studio, as always, our producer, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, which can be heard every day this week, Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. Here on the soul of VA. For those of you that have been joining us in the last several weeks, we've been talking about this historic nomination of the first African-American woman to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Joe Biden. That is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And this week, it is showtime. It is the confirmation hearing of this historic nomination. And with us, we've been having various guests on. We've been talking about it, the impact, and we're going to get into the process of what to expect this week. So we've been fortunate enough to have with us two sisters who are both legal scholars and have a third sister as well, who's also a law professor. We have with us Dean Jelani Jefferson-Exum, who is Dean of University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. And also, she is the Philip J. McElroy Professor of Law. And we have with her sister, Jalila Jefferson-Bullock, who is a professor, associate professor, tenured at Duquesne University School of Law in Pittsburgh, who teaches constitutional law courses. Thank you again, sisters, so much for joining us here on State of the Water.
Thank you for having us.
So,
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So before we left to go on our first break, we talked about building consensus on the courts. And what we've seen a lot of contentious buildup of issues that have become politicized on the court. The Supreme Court was usually that branch of government where, they kind of just sit there and it's only a few people, that can go in and hear the hearings and the cases. And they hear about 100 or so cases. Not too many make the public, eye. And that's pretty much it, right? But now, because of the politicization of the process, we get a lot more justices who are being confirmed that are younger and younger. And because of the rule change in the Senate, it used to be you had to have 2/3 majority, but the nuclear option was instituted by Justice, I call him Justice McConnell, but it's Senator McConnell, who had his eye on the Supreme Court that used the nuclear option and said, we're going to do away with that. We don't think we need it, right? After 200 some odd years. So this has really created what a lot of us are seeing in the academy, a lot of us are seeing in the political view, a lot of the lack of consensus building. Dean, what do you say about this new process of us confirming justices that are younger and younger, using the nuclear option? Is it creating a lack of consensus building, or you think it's part of the process?
In some ways, this is part of the process, and it makes sense politically for presidents to seek younger justices to have a longer lasting legacy on the Supreme Court. So I understand why it's happening this way. Jalila said before the break that it would be nice to have more consensus on the court. And I think you just have to remember that we have an adversarial system where when there are legal issues, you have one side versus another side, and so there's this built-in animosity, and so we see it sort of spun that way in the media and in our discourse. But as we were saying before, at the end of the day, justices come together to deliberate, and no matter the age of the justices, the background of the justices, they understand that these are deep, important legal issues. And so what you want to have, what we hope to have, and this is what I believe Judge Jackson will bring to the Supreme Court, is a voice, or, it's even better to have several voices, but certainly a voice that says, let's think about how these cases are affecting real life, everyday people, and let's just understand from that standpoint, can we find these common grounds? So we all have children and parents and loved ones. We've built families. We've had to make decisions about health. All these things that we can say we have in common. That's what you want. That's the voice that you want on the court. And so I think, we just are where we are in the fact that we're going to have younger justices, younger judges across the nation, which means they're going to be in their spaces for a very long time. And so the hope is that as we add more voices to the courts, and especially the Supreme Court, that they're the right types of voices, the voices that are going to bring those decisions back to the people, to keep people and the human dignity of us all central in these discussions, so that this isn't just a theoretical legal exercise that justices are doing when they deliberate, but they're really thinking about all of us. Absolutely. And that to me is what's most important.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about younger justices serving on the Supreme Court and being there for a long time. Right now, we have a justice on the bench that could be the longest serving Supreme Court justice in our modern time and really have a major influence on the court, and that's Justice Clarence Thomas. He's been, this year will mark 31 years that he would have been on the court. 31 years. And you and I know that the decisions that the court make, they're just not for that case or that moment, but they have impact for the next 25, 40, sometimes 50 plus years until another case comes up and is challenged on the court. From your perspective, Professor, what do you think would be the dynamic between the first African-American female Supreme Court justice and considerably the longest serving justice who is African-American, and both being from two extreme party affiliations or ideologies?
Well, we just a few moments talked about how it is possible, and it's been, the truth on the court, that you've got very different people from very different ideologies, oftentimes who become great personal friends, like Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, like Justice O'Connor and Justice Marshall, and I'm sure there are many, many other examples of that as well. And so I don't know, because they're so different, that they wouldn't be able to get along personally. But I am going to say that for them, what it means to be an African-American jurist, and of course I'm basing this on their decisions, is very, very different. And so I don't think that we can expect a lot of agreement, if you will, on some of the issues that African-Americans hold most dear, issues like voting rights, issues like affirmative action, things like that, because we're clear about what Justice Thomas's record is. But it must be remembered that we like to say in various circles, the Supreme Court justices are neutral, that they come with a neutral perspective, and all judges are neutral. But that's not really the truth. We can look at our own process where when the president decides who they'd like to nominate, and of course Senate confirmation is required, but the president chooses exclusively these days and really throughout history for the most part based upon their own party and whatever ideology they'd like seen advanced on the court. I mean, number one, it's a political appointment, although people like to say judges are supposed to be neutral. That's not the case. The second thing is that judges come in with their own set of ideologies. I mean, it's clear every single person on that court has a record that we can go and refer to, and we know precisely what their stand is on various issues. Now, of course, these things change when positions are presented in various ways, which is why lawyers exist, because of all these shades of gray, right? That can change over time, and we can't say a person is this because they belong to a certain party, but they certainly do come in with a certain set of ideologies, and we know for the most part where people land on at least some issues. And so, in any event, I don't think that their blackness is what's going to necessarily, or rather that their blackness is going to be the thing that joins them together in decisions, but it may be that they end up with a nice relationship, as many of the justices who are very different ideologically end up doing.
Absolutely. And look, we're going to talk about the influence of their blackness on the court, because that was a question that was asked in Judge Jackson's confirmation on the Federal Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. But I want us to talk about what we're going to see this week, okay, and kind of get your perspective on it. So as a preview of the hearing, it's going to last for 4 days, and it starts this week, March 21st through the 24th. And on Monday, on tomorrow, there will be opening statements will begin. And then on Tuesday is the first round of questioning. And also on Wednesday is the second round of questions and a closed door session on Judge Jackson's FBI background investigation. And then on Thursday, March 24th, there'll be testimony from the ABA and outside witnesses. And this is before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then there will be a vote taken. And then if the vote is they have the votes, it'll go to the full Senate for full confirmation. And then from there, it is pretty much a done deal. Dean, tell us, what can we expect in that opening statement from Judge Jackson and also others on the Judiciary Committee?
Well, from Judge Jackson, her main responsibility in this confirmation is to, number one, focus on her qualifications. So you can expect some references to her background, to the fact that she's been confirmed 3 times by the Senate. So she's going to be exuding a sense of trust, that folks have already said that they trust her, that they believe in her qualifications and in her ethics and her sort of demeanor as a judge, her judicial character, all of that, because she's already been through this process to be a judge. And so you can expect that she's going to highlight those things. We won't, when judges are confirmed, and Judge Jackson knows this, having been through the process, you're not going to hear her talk about politics or really focus on anything controversial in that sense. That's what she'll be pressed on later. But in opening statements, she's just going to lay out who she is, the fact that the Senate knows her, that she's been confirmed before, and that she's someone with impeccable character and upstanding judicial temperament, just sort of setting the tone, one of ease and comfort with her as the next Supreme Court justice.
Professor, your sister said this is not her first time at the party. She's been in that seat before. From your perspective, what should we expect from her and from the Judiciary Committee?
Well, as my sister said, she's going to talk about herself, and she'll talk about her love of the law. She'll talk about her qualifications, and she'll speak about herself in very specific terms. She'll do some of what we heard her do in her first address when the president announced her as the nominee. Well, she'll talk about her upbringing, her parentage, the values that they instilled, how that translated into her love for the law, her interest in education, and what she did in law school, and all the various experiences that she's had since then. Will be interesting, and we're already getting a preview of the spin that people are going to put on her narrative. It will be interesting to see how these members of the committee and then other members of the Senate and whomever else may have something to say. Well, it'll be interesting to hear how they try to chip away at her qualifications and how they try to make her appear less qualified because of the many experiences that she has had. And, we already see this preview of cherry picking, if you will, a few cases that don't really give a full story of how she ruled in certain areas, for example, child pornography, or this narrative that perhaps she's soft on crime because of her work on the Sentencing Commission, when that work was done with very heavy bipartisan efforts, and also when the statute itself was one that was passed by Congress and which specifically gave the Sentencing Commission the power to make some of these rules and laws retroactive if they wanted to. So it's interesting how the narrative is being spun as if she made some of these policies and these changes on her own when she did so with lots of work from the other side of the aisle. And of course, we'll get some nastiness, some things steeped in racism and steeped in gender discrimination that Black women have come to expect forever. But one thing I'll say about Judge Jackson is this: the story has always been that she is knocking the interviews out of the park. That in the individual interviews she's had with various senators, it's hard for them to find something bad to say about her because she's so supremely qualified and because she's so able to handle herself. So I'm looking forward to not really the questions, but I'm really looking forward to see what she does with them, because we know that she's going to answer them truthfully and honestly and with dignity and grace, and she'll clear up any of those issues just with the power of her own voice. I'm looking forward to that.
You know, I kind of got the feeling that this was going to be a little different, this hearing, because first of all, Senator McConnell, and they actually took the meeting, with her. Remember, they didn't even take a meeting with Merrick Garland. They're like, we're not interested, right? But we kind of got the idea that this may be a little different. But as you stated, there are some attacks that could be coming. But Dean, do you think it's a slippery slope in order to attack someone who's been confirmed several times? Also, to attack a Black woman who clearly has the record that she has and the qualification that she has in this day and time. Do you think that's a smart move?
I mean, it's not a smart move, but it's going to happen, and it's been already starting in measured ways. When Judge Jackson was announced as the nominee, there was really just a period of celebration. That was what was in the news. You didn't hear immediate attacks, and I think that's particularly because of what you just mentioned, right? That no one wanted to come out as though they were against a Black woman on the Supreme Court. That's not good. That's not a good look for anyone, for Republicans, certainly not. And so you had to just sort of sit back, let the celebrations happen, and then slowly, sort of bit by bit, you start to see some attacks here and there, cherry picking, as Jalila said, just trying to pick certain things that could be sort of really taken out of context, misconstrued, but just as headline sort of buzz language. So I expect that we're going to see that in the confirmation as well, because this is the Supreme Court. And after all, we just said that this is about a really long-standing legacy. Judge Jackson is a relatively young woman. She can have a long tenure on the Supreme Court. And so it means she's going to meet some opposition, but it's going to have to be done in measured ways to avoid looking like outward racism or gender discrimination. And so they're picking out just, what they can find in her record that can be spun in a negative light. But she's well able to handle all of this. As we said, she's done it before. And it does start to look like they're baseless attacks when you kind of put it into the context that she has been confirmed twice unanimously previously. So they're going to do what they can because it's the Supreme Court. But I'm not worried at all that she'll be able to handle questions with grace and with dignity and in ways that put the majority of the Senate at ease.
Absolutely. Now, on Tuesday and Wednesday of this confirmation hearing, after the opening statements on tomorrow, the committee members will each get 30 minutes of questioning time on Tuesday and 20 minutes on Wednesday. And questioning of Judge Jackson on Wednesday is expected to be shorter. Now, according to the New York Times, this article written on today, Republican leaders, it states, are wary of engaging in a potentially racially charged spectacle that could prompt a political backlash. And we just kind of discussed, it may be a slippery slope. They promised a more dignified review of the latest Supreme Court candidate after a series of bitter clashes over the court. Of course, we all saw the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearing as well, and that was probably one of the most contentious that we've seen in modern time, other than the Clarence Thomas hearing, and then, of course, Judge Bork. But in recent days, with the approach of the Senate Judiciary Committee's hearing on her nomination that began, the tone has shifted. Now, let's talk about some of the misconceptions, some of the questions that may come. So last this week, according to the New York Times, Senator Josh Hawley, a Missouri Republican who sits on the panel, will question Judge Jackson, claiming his review of her judicial record had determined that she had been lenient in sentencing some sex offenders, those convicted of possessing child pornography. He also suggested that as a member of the U.S. Sentencing Commission, she worked to reduce penalties for those caught with child pornography. A detailed background paper prepared by the Judiciary Committee made a similar case. Also, Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, minority leader, he doubled down on his suggestion that Judge Jackson's experience as a public defender could influence her view of the law and lead her to favor criminal defendants. Dean, this narrative that because you you're a public defender, somehow you're lenient on crime. And as a member of the U.S. Sentencing Commission, you are also lenient because you're looking at policing and sentencing in a different way. How do you foresee this line of questioning going on both sides?
So this is going to be one of the main issues that's raised. We've already sort of gotten a little bit of a sneak peek of it, and it's because it's something that sounds sensational that you can take out of context and kind of sort of pique people's interest. But the truth is, when you look at, and I'll focus on Judge Jackson's time on the Sentencing Commission and also her sentencing of child pornography possessors, when you really look at it and put it into context, which I know Judge Jackson will do in her answers, she is really mainstream when it comes to her record in sentencing, and specifically in sentencing child pornography cases. The Sentencing Commission has several times, and this is before and after Judge Jackson's time on the commission, explained that the child pornography guidelines fail to distinguish between less severe and more severe offenders. And so that's really in a judge's hand to do. Judges across the nation, so this is not particular to Judge Jackson, have written extensively about how these particular guidelines over-punish because the types of factors that you put into the calculations are not really the types of factors that judges or really anyone would care about. And I'll give you just an example because I know, many people may not have sat down with the federal sentencing guidelines in the way that I have. But just for example, you add points to defendants to get a higher guideline sentence based on things like number of images or did you use a computer, when nowadays everybody uses a computer and it's easy to download numbers of images. The things that people really care about is this particular offender going to harm children? And because that's what the judges in the cases actually look at and try to figure out, it turns out that in 5 of the 9 cases that have been pointed to as Judge Jackson sentencing someone below, a child pornography defendant below the guidelines, the prosecution in 5 of those 9 cases also advocated for below guideline sentences. This is normal. Everyone, prosecution, defense, they all know the guidelines are out of whack. And so a third of these cases by judges across the country are sentenced below the guidelines. So in other words, this is a headline that's really nothing. And Judge Jackson will point that out. She'll explain her record. She'll explain the things that she looks at in these cases, which are the exact same that every judge across the country does. And when you look at her entire context, then look at it all in context. She's not radical in this way at all. But it's that context that is missing, and that will be something else that will be the responsibility of Judge Jackson. I know she'll take it on as her responsibility to sort of set the record straight in defense of herself in these areas. But that's, the Supreme Court seat is it's high stakes.
Absolutely.
And so even though they said, this will be done with dignity, without undue attacks, we know that there will be attacks because this is it's high stakes.
Absolutely. Professor, as a public defender, is she lenient because she represented persons accused of crimes?
No, what it means is that she has an ultimate love for the Constitution. It means she's a Constitution lover. It doesn't mean she's a criminal lover. And the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution very clearly lays out that people in this country have the right to assistance of counsel, that we have a right to counsel to defend ourselves. Of course, the text of the Sixth Amendment just only says that in the court, just as it has done for various other provisions, various other constitutional provisions, the court has filled in what that should mean. What it means is that for those who are indigent, just like the rich, that the system is not supposed to be weighed against them, that no matter if you can afford an attorney or if you cannot, you still have a right to be represented by counsel when you have to go to court on a criminal matter to assist you in your defense. That is a constitutional requirement. It's puzzling to me, this idea that because the person was a public defender, they're somehow soft on crime, because the guarantees of the Sixth Amendment are those that benefit all of us. Any one of us who are accused of a crime want to know that we can rest and the guarantee that whether we can afford an attorney or not, one will be appointed for us. And so I have to say that I don't quite follow that argument, except that it is attention grabbing, and unfortunately, these days in the way that our government functions, we now have kind of taken big issues and put them into these very small sound bites. It's sometimes presented to the public to make things seem scary and to shock people into thinking a certain thing or voting a certain way, and then people we don't go and do the research and figure out what a thing actually means. The right to counsel is one that is helpful to all of us. It helps all Americans, and it is, again, deeply embedded in our Constitution. It's part of our governance. It's part of what we hold dear as a democracy. And so to say that she is somehow a lover of criminals because she chose to do this work is simply absurd. What she is a lover of the Constitution of the United States of America.
Absolutely. Now, as we stated that this is the second and third day, Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll have these questionings, and then after that, a private session on, those that are speaking on her behalf, the ABA and other witnesses. Dean, what do you foresee the ABA, who's endorsed her, to speak and say as they speak on behalf to endorse Judge Jackson?
Well, the ABA and other witnesses will have a little bit more freedom than Judge Jackson does in the way they can respond and the way they can contextualize their support of her. And the weight that the ABA has, of course, is that it is a national body. And so it really is coming with the force of this national group saying that when you think about lawyers across the country that understand the Constitution and the workings of government and and what's needed, what they want to see in a Supreme Court justice, the ABA is able to speak with the force of all those voices behind it in its support of Judge Jackson. Some of it will be what we expect to hear, about judicial temperament and ethics and reputation. But all of those really are huge because what they do is they say that across the country, lawyers see Judge Jackson as someone who should be on the Supreme Court, the type of justice that any lawyer would want to have their case go before. And this will be lawyers of all types, prosecutors, defense attorneys, civil attorneys, judges. It really will show that there's a breadth of support for her.
Absolutely. Professor, I'm going to I'm sorry, go ahead, Professor.
I just wanted to add to that the ABA just rated her well qualified, its highest rating, so they're going to speak very highly of her when they have the chance to do so.
Absolutely. Well, I want to give both of you a final 30 seconds to just let us know, again, just wrap this up. Let us know what this means for you, our community, and what can we do as listeners to give our voice to it. Now, again, this won't change the balance of the court. It's still going to be 6-3, but we've all stated that her voice is tremendously important on this court. Dean, 30 seconds to you. How impactful is this week coming up?
This week is hugely impactful. This is historic. It's exciting. It's really a joyful time for all of us, for our entire nation, because we will finally have the opportunity to see the confirmation. I'm speaking this into existence, as I know so many are, to see the confirmation of the first Black woman justice of the Supreme Court. It's long overdue, and it will bring another perspective to the court that has been so important to our country, finally now helping to shape our Supreme Court jurisprudence and the rights of all of us. And so it's an exciting time that we should all be supporting and all be excited about.
That's Dean Jelani Jefferson-Exum, who is Dean of the School of Law at University of Detroit Mercy, and Philip J. McElroy, Professor of Law. Thank you so much to you. Also, thank you so much to Jalila Jefferson-Bullock, who's professor at Duquesne University School of Law in Pittsburgh. Again, this is a tremendous week for us, tremendous week coming up with African-American community. But as we say on the show, we just don't tell you what to think or just give you information. We also want you to have a call to action. So we want you to stay tuned in, look at the confirmations, and contact your U.S. senators and let them know how you feel about this confirmation, whether you want it to go up and have her confirmed as the next U.S. Supreme Court Justice. Again, Professor Dean, thank you so much for joining us. This is Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville, and we'll see you next week live at 1 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.